It's midday in Dakar and 1 p.m. in Abuja. Good afternoon and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. The world marks Press Freedom Day with concerns about incessant attacks and arrest of journalists in the West African sub-region. Meanwhile, the Guinean press welcomes the decision of the military government to end the jamming of several private media signals.
He
reaffirmed the president of the transition's firm commitment to uphold the strict laws governing the country's media operations.
The United States is set to provide nearly $55 million to address a dire humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, conflict resolution and peace building on the agenda of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit set to begin in Banjul this weekend.
The agenda of the 15th summit focuses on the following main issues: conflict situations in the Muslim world, pursuit of peace, justice, security, stability, sustainable development, among others.
Stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is Abdullahi Hassan with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast and welcome to our listeners in Gambia, Ghana, Liberia and Sierra Leone. Today's International Press Freedom Day. However, in West Africa, media professionals and journalists continue to face arrests and restrictions as well as other violations including media suspensions, frequency jamming and restrictions on covering certain events. It is within this challenging context that the press in several ECOWAS countries is observing this occasion. Ogebirika shares some insight on what the terrain has been in the past 1 year.
Several West African countries have seen a decline in press freedom rankings. Over the past month, violations of press freedom have increased in the region. In Burkina Faso, the military in power has suspended around 10 international media outlets for covering events that implicated the state. Journalists critical of the transnational authorities have also been detained. In Mali, for nearly a month, the press has been prohibited from covering the activities of political parties and associations whose activities have been suspended by the military in power. Media critical of the military in power are automatically warned or suspended. The situation remains critical in Togo, where press organizations continue to raise alarms about press freedom. Several journalists are in exile and others are in prison for criticizing the government or revealing information that implicate the regime. In Niger, private media outlets denounce difficulties in covering events since the military came to power. In Guinea, after several months of confrontation between press organizations and authorities, the signals of several private media outlets considered critical of the military transition has been partially restored. In Senegal, the press hopes for an end to the recent violence against journalists during protests.
Ogebirika filed that report still on this occasion of the Press Freedom Day. The president of the Ghana Journalists Association, GJA, Albert Kwabena Douanfo, is hopeful that the country's performance on the World Press Freedom Index will improve in the latest report despite recent attacks on journalists. Last year, Ghana saw a decline in its ranking on the annual Press Freedom Index released by Reporters Without Borders, RSF, for the second consecutive year. The country slipped from 60th place in 2022 to 62nd in 2023, marking its worst performance in 18 years since it was ranked 66 in 2005.
The World Press Freedom Index evaluates 180 countries and 5 regions based on criteria such as pluralism, media independence, legislative framework, and journalist safety. Ghana's ranking on the annual Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Borders, RSF, dropped for the second consecutive year, falling from the 60th place to the 62nd in 2023. Despite this global decline, Ghana's rank among African countries improved, rising 9th place from 10th in the previous report. Speaking to the media in the Eastern Regional Capital, Koforidua, President of the Ghana Journalists Association, Albert Jumfor, acknowledged the challenges facing the media in Ghana and emphasized the importance of protecting press freedom.
For the past 3 years, Ghana has been sinking. We are hopeful that maybe tomorrow we will be telling a different story, regardless of the incessant attack, of the barbaric attack on the media over the past few months.
The president of the GJA also expressed concerns over the rise in attacks on journalists, citing specific incidents and highlighting the measures taken to address these cases.
Recently, we have taken some radical decision to even blacklist some dishonorable MPs and politicians. This is because we want to end impunity against journalists.
World Press Freedom Day is observed globally on May 3 each year, highlighting the fundamental principles of press freedom, assessing its status worldwide, and honoring journalists who have lost their lives in service. For WADR, Nadidi Tete, Accra.
Now, while Ghana aims to move up in the Freedom Index ranking, an international organization dedicated to protecting journalists says the media space in Togo is facing a storm. In the last couple of years, the Committee to Protect Journalists (CPJ) says it has recorded several arrests of Togolese journalists, many exiled, and the continued censoring and suspension of media platforms by the regulatory agency. Jonathan Rosen, CPJ's senior researcher for Africa, speaking to WADR, not only confirms these incidents but comments on actions needed to immediately address the situation.
The situation in Togo is serious and it's important and it deserves attention. The journalists in Togo for years have been ringing the alarm bells about the situation there. We've seen an uptick in arrests of journalists. We've seen journalists fleeing the country. We've seen the regulator suspending outlets consistently over a number of years. We've also seen the deploying of very sophisticated spyware, the Pegasus spyware against at least 2 journalists, and we've seen also documentation by other civil society groups of civil society more broadly being targeted with these tools. This is a broad spectrum of threats against a free press that we see in Togo. And we see also really the need for legal reform, the press code enabling online reporting in particular to be targeted with criminal sanction. It's difficult, of course, in these sorts of circumstances to think about exactly what's going to try and move the needle. But of course, we're constantly in touch with journalists on the ground there. We're trying our best to document these issues and lay out in our reporting the specific sections of the laws that we're concerned about. These are all things that we try and stay on top of, again, so that when there is an opportunity for the engagement to improve things with the authorities, we can bring as much evidence as compellingly as possible.
Jonathan Rosen, CPJ's senior researcher for Africa, speaking there. And finally, the press in Guinea has welcomed the decision of the military government to end the jamming of several private media signals, describing it as satisfactory. For 7 months, these media outlets, considered critical of the military in power, were not broadcasting. Several journalists and technicians then found themselves in forced unemployment. The Guinean press now aims to establish a self-regulatory body to manage future crises between the press and the authorities. Augustine Coley has won this report filed in by WADR's Conakry correspondent Tiano Alpha Ibrahim Abalde.
Significant turn of events. Press actors in Guinea are on the brink of a breakthrough following a crucial meeting with Prime Minister Ba Ore. The head of government revealed that he had to receive an order from the transitional president, General Mamadi Doumbouya, to lift the restrictions that have been stifling several media outlets in the country for the past few months. Abubakar Kamara, president of the Union of Free Radio and Television Stations of Guinea, shared insights indicating the Prime Minister's readiness to implement this decision contingent upon the press actors' reassurance.
He reaffirmed the president of the transition's firm commitment to uphold the strict laws governing the country's media operations. This also emphasized the need to prioritize the sensitivities of the current times.
soit de plus mise en avant.
The Guinean press organizations have pledged to establish a self-regulatory body to manage potential crises effectively, a proactive step towards ensuring responsible journalism and media practices.
Nous, à notre niveau, nous avons quand même réitéré.
We reiterated our commitment to adhere to the law professionally, which is why we took the initiative to establish a self-regulatory body with a form of peace tribunal.
After the meeting with the Guinean head of government, the Post and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, the frequencies of prominent radio stations like FIM FM, Joma FM, and eSpace FM have been unblocked. However, the much-awaited reintroduction of these stations into the Canon Plus booklet is still pending.
A report by WADR's Eterno Alpha Ibrahima Balding Conakry and Voice Note Studios by Augustine Cooley.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Remember, we're live on WADR.org and on YouTube and Facebook. The United States is set to provide approximately $55 million in humanitarian aid to address severe crises in Burkina Faso. Imo Edet completes the story.
As announced by the U.S. aid chief Samantha Power on Thursday, the aid will primarily target emergency food and nutrition needs alongside other forms of support, bringing the total emergency assistance from the U.S. Agency for International Development USAID to Burkina Faso to nearly $158 million since the start of fiscal year 2023. Burkina Faso is among several nations in Africa's Sahel region grappling with Islamist insurgency associated with groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, which have resulted in thousands of deaths and millions of displaced individuals. Recent frustrations over the failure of authorities to protect civilians have contributed to political instability, including 2 coups in Mali, 2 in Burkina Faso, and 1 in Niger since 2020. The current military rulers in Burkina Faso seized power at the end of 2022. In a statement, Power urged all parties, including transition authorities, the Burkinabe military and armed groups, to safeguard civilians and facilitate the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid to prevent further deterioration of the dire situation.
Imo Edet reporting there. Meanwhile, the Burkinabe transitional government has summoned charge the affairs of the United States Embassy in Ouagadougou. Eric B. Whitaker was summoned Thursday evening by the Burkinabe Minister of Foreign Affairs following the publication of a joint statement from the U.S. and United Kingdom regarding a report by Human Rights Watch accusing the Burkinabe army of having massacred 223 civilians in the north of the country in February. The Israel-Palestinian war has taken center stage at the ministerial meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) underway at the Banjul Summit in the Gambian capital. Also discussed on the first day of the 2-day ministerial meeting included security, terrorism, and security among the member countries. WADR's Sankle Jankwe Banjul tells us more.
A total of 57 foreign ministers representing the member countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation (OIC) have convened to engage in discussions addressing critical issues impacting their nations. Of particular focus are the ongoing Palestinian conflict and matters of security. Leading the Ministerial Council is Gambia's Foreign Minister, Mamadou Tangara, who serves as the chairman, guiding the deliberations towards constructive outcomes.
The agenda of the 15th summit focuses on the following main issues: Palestine, conflict situations in the Muslim world, pursuit of peace, justice, security, stability, sustainable development, among others.
Simultaneously, universities in the United States are witnessing significant protests advocating for an end to hostilities in Gaza, underscoring the global concern for peace and stability in the region. In a call to action, the Council Chairman urged member countries, especially those in Africa, to forge meaningful partnerships that foster cooperation and progress.
As this summit is hosted by the Gambia on behalf of the African region, let us consider how the African region in particular can benefit from our collective efforts by addressing the unique challenges facing African member states. We can ensure that the benefits of unity and solidarity are felt across the continent.
The Banjul OIC Summit theme, Enhancing Unity and Solidarity through Dialogue for Sustainable Development, encapsulating the shared commitment of OIC member states to promote unity, dialogue, and sustainable development for the betterment of their nations and the broader Islamic community. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankole Jenko reporting from Banjul.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here's a reminder of our top stories. The world marks a Press Freedom Day with concerns about incessant attacks and arrests of journalists in the West African sub-region. Meanwhile, the Guinean press welcomes the decision of the military government to end the jamming of several private media signals. The United States is set to provide nearly $55 million to address a dire humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso and conflict resolution and peace building on the agenda of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit set to begin in Banjul this weekend. Still ahead in the news is the guest interview and sports update. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Many thanks for staying with us. Liberian President Joseph Boakai has made a landmark decision to end the culture of impunity by signing Executive Order Number 131, establishing the Office of War and Economic Crimes Courts for the country. Since the end of Liberia's decade-long civil war in 2003, successive governments have failed to hold accountable those most responsible for the crisis, which resulted in the deaths of more than 250,000 people. WADR's Moreover correspondent Naliton Popper has more.
The signing of the executive order followed the passage of a joint legislative resolution seeking the establishment of an extraordinary criminal tribunal to prosecute warlords and their financiers. During the signing of the executive order, the Liberian leader announced the establishment of the Office of War Crimes to initiate processes leading to the establishment of the courts.
I have invited all of you here to join me in consummating a process that was set in motion, deliberate actions and steps towards bringing justice and closure to the scars and memories of our tragic and violent misadventure into more than 14 years of senseless civil conflict.
While calls for the prosecution of those bearing the greatest responsibility for the civil crisis have been welcomed, some Liberians believe there are legal obstacles that need to be addressed before setting up the court. Criminal lawyer Arthur Johnson is one of them. He explains why.
The document under Article 34 of the CPA, it granted amnesty that the National Transitional Government of Liberia gave, it didn't say mayo, it said gave consideration to a recommendation for general amnesty to all persons and the parties engaged or involved in military activities during the Liberian civil conflict that is the subject of this agreement.
Meanwhile, Rachel Kuhn, a lawmaker with the governing party, also believes that more consultations among the population in the form of a referendum are essential.
Going back to our constituents to be able to engage them on this kind of critical decision we're about to take or make on their behalf. There are diverse views from all over the place. So you can see that the people we represent have a great uptake in these things that we do.
Despite these differing views, the Liberian leader is expected to depart the country shortly on an official visit to the United States, where he will solicit funding for setting up the courts from international partners. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I'm Darlington Popper in Monrovia.
Politics,
analyses on major news,
social matters, and all. This is a guest.
Our guest interview segment this afternoon features Jonathan Rosen, a senior researcher for Africa at the Committee to Protect Journalists CPJ, who has been speaking to WADR's Francis Boniface about his organization's work across the world. In beginning the chat, Rosen first responds to a question about CPJ's measures and mechanisms to protect journalists.
It's an important question. The Committee to Protect Journalists is an independent, non-profit organization that promotes press freedom around the world. Of course, we have a team that covers and follows events in West Africa very closely, and the organization really functions with three main pillars. The first is reporting and research. So we are constantly tracking and documenting press freedom issues, attacks on journalists, the tragic killing of journalists, laws that are going to inhibit the press, surveillance, anything that's going to have a chilling effect on reporters' ability to work safely. We are documenting that and publishing it on our website, which is cpj.org. That reporting serves as an evidence base for our advocacy. We speak to governments directly, we speak to security forces directly to try and improve conditions for journalists on the ground. We take our evidence and our advocacy to other centers of power, the UN, other governmental bodies, to try and improve the working conditions for journalists. That's the second pillar, is that advocacy. And the third pillar, which of course is also informed by this reporting, is our emergency response, which is really just trying to get journalists out of harm's way when they're facing immediate threats or immediate danger. We're offering journalists avenues out of really, really tricky or dangerous circumstances, as well as support when they're in detention and are being denied food or medical supplies. But it also prepares and publishes safety information that journalists can look at and use to stay safe on the ground, and all of that is freely available on our website.
How much local collaboration are you having with national bodies or bodies at the grassroots?
It's a huge part of our work is to be constantly connecting with journalists. Of course, anytime we're doing reporting, we're journalists using the tools of journalism for journalists. And so we're connecting directly with media houses, with the journalists that are directly affected by these stories, trying to support local media whenever they need us. And of course, local civil society are huge partners in this. They're, in many ways, the most important voices on the ground, most connected to these issues. And so we're doing our best at all times to amplify their calls for justice or for reform. And it's really a combined effort between, us at sort of an international level, trying to connect and understand and support journalists at the local level and the civil society doing that work.
Now, in terms of challenges, what is the landscape like for you? What are the challenges you are facing in West Africa?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges in West Africa are in some ways similar to challenges we face elsewhere around the world, where governments simply don't listen to the concerns of the local press or press freedom advocates at the local level or at the international level. There are governments where we just don't have traction, we don't have engagement. There are governments where we do have engagement, where we are able to contribute, for example, to the public hearing process to reform that Nigerian Cybercrime Act. But there are governments that won't take our calls, won't engage in dialogue, and that's, of course, a major, major challenge.
Let's look at Africa generally, but especially West Africa in particular, because we've had a series of military coups in West Africa, and we know how military regimes, their relationship with the press is not usually the best. We're also talking about the context of security, terrorism, which is making life very difficult for journalists.
Yeah, we've seen across the Sahel this circumstance where journalists are caught between the insecurity and the dangers that come with reporting on or just living in a situation of conflict, and authorities, military authorities that are extremely intolerant of reporting on those security concerns, on the things that are defining the lives of the people in those countries. And that's a very dangerous set of circumstances where journalists are facing threats from two sides, from two different sets of actors. And we're just doing our best at the moment to try and meet those journalists' needs wherever we can, to document these concerns, to be consistent in the way that we understand these threats, not to oversimplify them, and really, just try and be there for the journalists in the best way we can. But as you rightly point out, it's very difficult.
Now, the theme of today's event is the press at the service of the planet. West Africa in particular is suffering from the consequences of climate change. Of course, we experienced some heat waves, it was especially deadly in Mali and in other countries. And even in Senegal here, experts are saying we should expect some kind of heat wave later in the year. Now, what role exactly should the press play?
what we're looking at is a massive challenge for society, a massive challenge for the planet, and it underscores how important journalism is in times like this, and how important it is for journalists to be able to do their work freely, to be able to give people the information they need to manage these circumstances as best they can. For us as a planet to understand the way that climate change is affecting people's lives requires journalists' ability to do their work freely, and if journalists can't, because of some of the threats like the ones we've been talking about today, that is going to inhibit our ability to address these challenges as effectively as possible.
That was Jonathan Rosen, a senior researcher for Africa at the Committee to Protect Journalists CPJ. It's now time for some sports news with Sankule Janko.
Hello out there, warm welcome and thank you for joining us. President of the Ghana Football Association GFA, Coach Okraku, has applauded Dreams FC coach Karim Zito for his exceptional work, according to media reports in Ghana. The Ghanaian tactician is behind the success of Dreams FC in the MTN FA Cup and the CAF Confederation Cup. He masterminded the club from Dawo's amazing run in the CAF Confederation Cup as the team reached semi-finals despite no experience in any of the continental inter-club competition, according to reports. Although Dreams FC are out of the CAF Confederation Cup, the team is on course to defending their MTN FA Cup title. On Thursday, coach Karim Zito and his boys defeated Soccer Intellectuals by 1-0 to reach the semi-finals of the domestic cup competition. And Mamelodi Sundowns FC reaffirmed their leading position as South African football kings on Thursday evening with a 7th successive league title after thrashing Kaizer Chiefs 5-1 at the Soccer City in Johannesburg. The reigning African Football League AFL champions, who saw their second CAF Champions League title hopes dashed after bowing out of the competition at the hands of Esperance just a week ago, put smiles on the faces of their fans with the resounding victory that see them make it 7 in a row, according to CAF official website. Thursday's commanding victory over Chiefs sees the former African champions clinch the domestic title with 6 games to spare and brings their league titles to 17 in total, a record that sees them extend their lead as the club with the most league titles in South Africa, ahead of their rivals Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
And that's how we wrap up this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Maudiju for the technical support. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook, WADR English Service, and we stream live on WADR.org. I am Abdullahi Hassan. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, New Me FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia.